When it comes to a collector's games, perhaps the only thing more personal than which consoles and games they own would be how they display them. Now, because this is such a personal preference, naturally there is more than one way to do it. In fact, there's a million ways to do it, and there's really no wrong way to do it. Well, actually maybe there is, but I trust all of you. Okay, so while I am going to share with you some of the things that I do, this video is more about just considering all the different factors that go into how you want to display everything. The first thing you'll probably think about is just where you want to keep all your games. In your bedroom, in the living room, or perhaps just a room that's entirely designated to video games. Maybe even a basement or attic if that's an option. I know a lot of gamers will do that if their collection is big enough. In addition to the games, you also need to think about where you are going to be playing the games, and therefore where the consoles go. That being said, sometimes we don't have every console hooked up, and so the ones we're not currently playing might be somewhere away from the TV. Personally, I always have everything hooked up, and what I actually do is keep all my retro consoles in a designated game room that I have along with the CRT TV, in addition to something called an EDTV. And in case you're wondering, no, EDTV does not stand for erectile dysfunction TV. Then I have my more modern consoles in our living room hooked up to a bigger 4K TV. And if you're wondering where the consoles are, this might be a good opportunity for me to ask whether or not you want your consoles to be visible if they're in a less private area of your home. There's a number of reasons for this. Maybe you got toddlers or kids running around that you don't want messing with them, or maybe you simply just don't want them showing for whatever reason. Well, if you do want to keep them hidden, then let me tell you what I do. I put these suckers in drawers. You just slide the drawers out when you want to play them, and keep that designated drawer open while you're playing so that the console has proper airflow. Now, this might seem a little weird because I've basically just repurposed a dresser, but there are entertainment centers that have things like closable little doors that will function in a similar way. Naturally, all the cables are hidden, running behind the back of the piece of furniture and down to the power outlet or over to the TV inputs. But enough about the consoles, let's talk about the games. When it comes to games, the first thing to consider is how you collect your games. And what I mean by that is, do you collect them in the box or case, with the manual, etc. For disc-based games, you kind of have to have the case and manual in order to have it displayed in any kind of way. I mean, if you just have the discs, I guess you could still display them, but I've never seen somebody do it. Cartridges are a different story though. They stand on their own pretty well without their cases or boxes. As you can see by my collection, that's how I prefer to keep mine. Not only that, but it can be kind of cumbersome to keep your cartridges inside of their boxes, because then you have to open them up every time you want to put the game cartridge into your system in order to play it. Now, if you do still want to collect the cases, then a really simple option is to just keep the cartridges outside of their boxes, and then keep the boxes somewhere else, either displayed or not. Also, some boxes are a little easier to store your cartridges inside of, with the best example being these Sega Genesis boxes, often called clamshell cases. Not only are these easy to pop your game cartridge inside and out of, but they're also a lot more durable than the thin cardboard boxes that a lot of other games came in. Though, you do tend to see the corners getting chipped off of these things, so look out for that. And while we're talking about how protected your games are, I feel like it's a good idea to make sure that the bottoms of your cartridges are covered, just to prevent stuff like excess dust getting onto the contacts. Nintendo actually made covers for their Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, which also have the added benefit of allowing the Super Nintendo games to rest flat. Sega Genesis games luckily have flat bottoms to begin with, so as long as you have them against a flat surface, they should be okay. Another big consideration when displaying your games is going to depend on how many games you have and how much space you have to store them. For example, I choose to display my cartridges in a way that's not very space efficient, but I do it anyways because I like being able to look at the artwork for each game. If you want to save on space, storing your cartridges stacked against each other with just the label of the game showing is going to be a lot more space efficient. Alright, and now for some of the personal touches. This could range from lighting, which games go next to what, video game related stuff like amiibos or what have you. As far as where you put your games, most people will obviously put all the games from any given system together and then line up each collection of games either chronologically or perhaps by putting all the Nintendo stuff together, PlayStation stuff all together, or what have you. That's actually what I like to do, as you may have noticed from my videos. There's also ways to mix and match with some creative combinations. For example, some people like to put every game for the same series all together, even if it spans across multiple systems. And speaking of systems, you can have fun with which consoles you put next to each other. For example, I like to put my Sega Genesis right next to my Super Nintendo because in my mind, those two consoles will just always be connected in history. Another thing people like to do is put posters up on the wall. I did this by pulling some of my favorite posters out of Nintendo Power magazines, but you can also find plenty of places online to buy brand new posters. And when it comes to decorating your game room, it doesn't strictly have to be gaming related stuff. It could just be anything that reminds you of gaming or perhaps the nostalgia surrounding it that you feel. For example, I have this giant Super Soaker bazooka that I keep in my room because it's one of my favorite childhood memories. Oh, and one more tip that I can offer before I wrap things up here. Inevitably, us gamers will end up with a lot of cords and cables that we have to deal with. Especially when you get other stuff like lighting involved, the amount of cords you have can start to become pretty overwhelming. A really easy fix are these cable covers that I ran across online. They're simple to use and a really nice fix to clean up the look of your cables. All you gotta do is just wrap them around your cables and then zip on up. You can also find ones that use Velcro instead of zippers as well. Anyways, that's just one tip of mine, but as you can imagine, the amount of tips and personal display choices is nearly endless with this kind of stuff. So of course, I'd like to hear what all of you have to say about it. If you have any personal tips or favorite parts of your display, I'd love to hear what they are down in the comments. Perhaps even some links to pictures if you have them. And heck, if you're somebody who doesn't really display your games at all and just throws them in a box, there's nothing wrong with that either. So with that said, leave your comments down below and I will see ya in the next video.